The forest stretched wide and quiet in the early morning, and soft light moved slowly between tall trees while the ground stayed cool and damp under fallen leaves. Max the German Shepherd walked alone along a narrow path with steady steps and alert eyes because he was trained to notice small changes and hidden signs. His ears lifted when the wind shifted and carried a strange smell that did not belong to the forest. It was a mix of fear, sweat, and something human, and this made Max slow down and breathe deeply. He lowered his head and followed the scent carefully because his training told him that this smell meant trouble. Birds stopped singing as he moved deeper, and the forest felt heavier and still. Every step took him farther from the ranger station and closer to something unknown. Max had worked with the rangers for a long time, and he trusted his instincts more than anything. His paws pressed into the soil as he passed broken branches and tall bushes. The smell grew stronger and his heart beat faster with purpose. He stopped suddenly when he heard a low, weak sound that did not belong to any animal. It was a sound filled with pain and tired breath. Max moved faster, pushing through thick bushes without fear. Then he saw something that made his body freeze for a moment. A man was tied tightly to a large tree, and rope wrapped around his chest and arms holding him in place. The man wore a ranger uniform that was dirty and torn, and his head leaned forward as if he had little strength left. His face looked pale and dry, and his eyes were half closed. This man was Tom, a forest ranger who had gone missing the night before. Tom had been on night patrol checking the deeper areas of the forest when he disappeared without a trace. His team searched for hours but found nothing, and fear slowly spread through the station. Now Max stood in front of him, breathing quietly and watching closely. Tom slowly lifted his head when he sensed movement, and when his eyes met the dog, he felt a wave of relief. He tried to speak, but his voice came out weak and broken. Max stepped closer and sniffed the rope carefully as if trying to understand the problem. He walked around the tree once, checking the area and listening for danger. The forest stayed silent and no footsteps followed. Tom tried again to speak and whispered the dog's name with hope. Max sat in front of him for a moment, and his eyes stayed focused and calm. He knew he could not free the man alone, and time was important. Max gave a sharp bark that echoed between the trees as if marking the place. Then he turned quickly and ran back through the forest with full speed. Branches scratched his sides, and leaves flew into the air as he followed his memory of the path. His body moved with purpose, and his mind stayed focused on one goal. He ran past fallen logs and crossed small streams without slowing down. The ranger station appeared between the trees as the sun climbed higher. The other rangers noticed Max immediately because his behavior was not normal. He barked loudly and ran in circles, then grabbed the edge of a jacket and pulled hard. One ranger named Paul knelt down and looked into Max's eyes and saw urgency. Max ran a few steps, then stopped and looked back again. The team understood without words and grabbed their gear quickly. They followed Max into the forest with fast steps and worried faces. As they moved deeper, the forest felt different and quiet again. Paul felt his chest tighten as fear grew with every step. Max led them with confidence and never slowed down. After some time they reached the tree where Tom was tied. The moment the rangers saw him, their faces changed with shock and anger. They rushed forward and cut the rope carefully while Tom struggled to stay awake. He fell to the ground, but strong hands supported him. Tom looked at Max and tears filled his eyes as he tried to smile. The team helped him drink water and checked his condition quickly. Questions filled the air, but Tom was too weak to answer yet. Paul looked around the area and noticed marks on the ground that did not belong to animals. Something bad had happened here, and it was not an accident. The forest that once felt peaceful now felt dangerous and full of secrets. Max stood beside Tom, watching the trees as if guarding him. None of them knew yet that this discovery was only the beginning of a story that would shock everyone and change the way they saw the forest forever. Tom lay on a stretcher as the rangers slowly moved him through the forest, and every step felt heavy because the quiet trees now seemed to watch them closely. Max walked beside Tom with steady focus, and his body stayed between the man and the forest, as if he understood the danger was not over. Paul kept looking around and noticed broken branches and deep marks in the soil that showed someone had dragged Tom there. The team did not speak much because fear and questions filled their minds. When they reached the ranger station, the med team helped Tom inside and gave him water and rest. Tom's hands shook as he held the cup and his eyes moved often toward the door. Max sat near him and did not move even when others passed by. After some time, Tom gained enough strength to speak slowly. He said he was checking a remote area when he heard a sound behind him, and before he could react, someone grabbed him. He said he never saw a face and only felt rope and pain and darkness. The room stayed silent as the rangers listened carefully. Paul felt anger rise inside him because this forest was supposed to be safe. Tom said he heard voices later and tools hitting metal somewhere nearby. He said the voices sounded calm and planned, and that scared him more than anything. Max lifted his head when Tom spoke, and his ears pointed forward as if remembering something. Paul realized this was not a random act and someone was using the forest for something hidden. The rangers decided they could not ignore this and needed to search deeper. They planned to follow the signs Max had first noticed. Tom was taken to rest, but Max refused to leave the door until Paul promised they would return soon. Later that day, the team moved out again with Max leading them back into the forest. The sun was higher, but the forest still felt cold and quiet. Max followed the path slowly this time and stopped often to sniff the ground. Paul noticed that Max avoided certain areas as if warning them away. After a while, Max stopped near a group of thick trees and barked once. Behind the trees they found something unexpected. There was a hidden clearing with signs of human work. Wooden crates sat under leaves and metal tools were buried shallow in the soil. Paul's heart pounded as he looked around. This place explained the sounds Tom heard. Someone had been working here in secret. The team searched carefully and found maps and markings that showed parts of the forest with symbols. No one spoke because the meaning was clear. Someone knew the forest well and wanted to stay unseen. Max suddenly growled low and moved toward a darker path leading away from the clearing. Paul raised his hand and the team stopped. They followed Max slowly and quietly. The path led to an old structure hidden by vines and trees. It looked abandoned from the outside, but the ground showed fresh steps. The air felt tense and heavy. Max stood still and watched the door. Paul felt fear but also determination. They were close to something big and dangerous. Paul signaled the team to wait while he looked closer. Inside the structure they found more tools and signs of recent use, but no people. Whoever was here had left not long ago. Max sniffed the air and walked in circles, then stopped and stared toward the deeper forest. Paul understood and knew this was not over. The team returned to the station with what they found and shared the news with others. Word spread fast and more rangers joined the search. Tom watched from a distance and felt a mix of fear and guilt because he knew his capture had been a warning. Max stayed near him and rested his head on Tom's knee. Tom whispered thanks to the dog and felt strength return slowly. That night the forest felt different for everyone. Lights stayed on at the station and no one slept well. Paul stood outside and looked toward the trees, knowing someone was still out there watching. Max lifted his head and stared into the darkness with calm, alert eyes. The bond between the dog and the rangers grew stronger because they knew Max had saved a life and revealed a hidden truth. No one yet knew who was behind it or why Tom had been tied to that tree. But one thing was clear. The forest was hiding more secrets, and the next discovery would shock them even more. Morning came slowly and the forest looked calm again, but everyone at the ranger station knew it was only a quiet mask. Paul gathered the team early and spoke in a low, serious voice while maps lay spread across the table. The signs they found the day before pointed to careful planning and deep knowledge of the land. Max sat near the door watching every movement and sensing the tension in the air. Tom was resting better now, but his eyes showed worry and unfinished fear. He told Paul that the voices he heard were patient and never rushed, and that made them more dangerous. The team decided to search deeper zones that were rarely checked, and Max would lead again. When they entered the forest, the sunlight broke through leaves in long lines and dust floated quietly. Max moved ahead slowly, stopping often and sniffing the ground with focus. Paul noticed how Max changed direction near old trails as if following a memory left in the soil. The forest felt endless and time passed without notice. After hours of walking, Max suddenly stopped near a rocky slope and lowered his head. He sniffed the ground, then barked once and stepped back. The rangers climbed carefully and saw a narrow opening hidden behind thick bushes. Inside, the air felt cool and the smell of metal and oil was strong. They entered slowly and found a small cave-like space carved by time and hands. Inside were more crates and tools and a simple table with papers spread out. The papers showed drawings of forest sections and paths marked clearly. Paul felt a chill because this was not random work. Someone was studying their movements. Max moved deeper and scratched at the ground, revealing footprints pressed into soft dirt. The prints were fresh and not alone. Paul counted more than one set and realized they were being watched even now. Suddenly Max froze and lifted his head toward the cave entrance. A sound came from outside and then silence again. Paul raised his hand and the team stood still. The moment stretched long and heavy. Then Max barked sharply and ran outside. The rangers followed and saw movement between the trees. Shadows slipped away fast and silent. Paul knew chasing blindly was dangerous, but letting them escape felt worse. Max led them with speed and focus through twisting paths and thick brush. The forest seemed to close in and every sound felt loud. After a long chase, the movement stopped near a river bend. The ground showed rushed steps and disturbed stones. Whoever fled knew how to disappear. Paul clenched his hands in frustration, but Max stayed calm and sniffed carefully. He followed the trail along the river, then stopped and looked up at Paul. The message was clear. The trail ended here for now. The team returned slowly, carrying the weight of what they learned. At the station, more rangers waited and listened as Paul explained everything. The forest was being used for secret work and Tom was tied to stop him from discovering more. The question was why. Tom spoke again later and remembered one detail clearly. He said he heard the word move spoken more than once. Paul realized the group might be planning to leave or change location. Time was running out. The team decided to set quiet watchpoints across the forest. Max stayed with Tom during the night and rested close to him. Tom placed his hand on Max's back and felt safe for the first time since the night he was taken. Outside, the forest wind moved through trees like whispers. Someone out there knew they had been discovered. Paul stood watch and looked into the darkness, thinking about how close danger had come. Max lifted his head and stared in the same direction as if sharing the thought. The forest was silent but full of unseen eyes. Everyone understood that the next move would reveal the truth. What they did not know yet was that the final discovery would shock not only the rangers but everyone who believed the forest was harmless. The final day began with a heavy silence that sat over the ranger station like fog, and everyone moved carefully as if sound itself could give something away. Paul gathered the full team and spoke with calm strength because fear would only slow them now. Max stood at his side, steady and alert, and his eyes followed every movement in the room. Tom was stronger and insisted on standing nearby because he wanted to see the end of what had begun with him. The plan was simple and quiet and based on patience. Watch points were already placed and the forest was no longer empty to the rangers. As the sun climbed higher, Max suddenly lifted his head and walked toward the trees with purpose. Paul followed and the team moved silently behind them. Max led them toward the river bend again, but this time he turned before reaching the water. He moved uphill and into a thick area that had been ignored before. The air smelled fresh, but underneath it carried metal and oil again. Max slowed and his body became tense. Paul raised his hand and everyone stopped. Ahead, the trees opened into a wide hidden space that shocked them. A large covered setup stood there, built carefully to blend into the forest. Panels were hidden under leaves and tools were packed neatly. This was not careless work, and it showed planning and time. Paul felt anger and relief at the same moment, because now they finally saw the full truth. As they moved closer, voices could be heard speaking calmly. The group inside did not expect visitors. Paul signaled and the rangers stepped out together, showing authority and control. The people froze and raised their hands in surprise. There was no chaos, only quiet shock. Max stood firm and watched every movement closely. The rangers secured the area and made sure no one was hurt. The people were taken away peacefully, and the hidden setup was shut down. The forest felt lighter, almost instantly, as if it could breathe again. Tom watched from a distance and felt the weight lift from his chest. He walked to Max and knelt beside him, placing both hands around the dog's neck. Tears filled his eyes, not from fear this time, but from relief and gratitude. Paul came over and rested a hand on Tom's shoulder. He told him that without Max none of this would have been found in time. News of what happened spread quickly and shocked everyone who heard it. People could not believe something so hidden had existed so close to safety. The forest was searched again carefully, and nothing else was found. Days passed and calm returned slowly. Tom recovered fully and returned to work with a deeper respect for every shadow and sound. Max became known as more than a trained dog and more than a hero. He became a symbol of trust and instinct. The bond between the rangers grew stronger, and they worked with new awareness and care. Paul often walked the forest paths with Max beside him and felt thankful for the quiet. The tree where Tom had been tied was left untouched as a reminder. Not of fear but of survival and teamwork. The forest stood tall and peaceful once more, but the rangers never forgot the lesson. Danger does not always come loudly, and safety depends on those who listen closely. Max walked through the trees with calm confidence, and the forest accepted him as its guardian. The story of the German Shepherd and the Ranger spread far and stayed with people because it showed courage, loyalty, and the power of noticing what others miss. /